Hey, everybody. We have a word from one of our sponsors today. You know, it's difficult to find things to wear to work. I think it's mostly difficult, really, to find clothes that travel well, that don't get all wrinkly, and Rhone is perfect for that for menswear. Men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man, and here is why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion with its commuter collection, which offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos. You never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone commuter collection. Rhone's comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work to your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. With Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I'll say this. I got a Rhone shirt for my fiance. It is probably his go-to shirt because you don't have to dry clean it. You don't have to iron it. It just comes out of the dryer completely wrinkle-free. And it's really comfortable. Like, just think of the best workout clothes that you have. It's that kind of material, but it doesn't look like it. So you can get away with it and still look very presentable and professional at work or on the golf course. Or you can get one of their suit jackets and blazers. And I think Sam did that. He's just, waxes poetically about Rhone, and I have great experience with it as well. The commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to Rhone, RHONE.com/Majority Report and use promo code Majority Report to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to Rhone, RHONE.com/Majority Report and use code Majority Report, one word, at checkout. It's time to find your corner office comfort. And now, the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, February 8th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Mark Paul, author of The Ends of Freedom, Reclaiming America's Lost Promise of Economic Rights. Then we'll be speaking with Guillaume Long, former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ecuador, about American capitalists really ravaging Honduras. Meanwhile, the U.S. kills a militia commander in Baghdad as Netanyahu refuses to engage with Hamas's ceasefire proposal, ignoring the pleas of the hostages' families. Instead, Israel presses forward with a ground offensive in Rafah, the southernmost part of Gaza, where over 1 million Palestinians have been told to flee. And the official death count of 27,000 appears to be a significant undercount. The ability to count the dead collapses with infrastructure in Gaza, and reports of torture and starvation continue. Biden deploys another White House official to meet with Arab leaders in Michigan. That'll do the trick. The Senate will try to pass the supplemental Israel-Ukraine-Taiwan package today, sans border funding. But don't worry, right-wingers. Biden is reportedly considering executive action at the border, continuing to pretend like this is an issue. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court hears Trump's appeal to remain on the ballot today. Huge case. A judge denies his motion for a mistrial in the E. Jean Carroll defamation finding. Pay up, Donnie. The largest survey ever of trans Americans finds 94% were happier after transitioning. How's that for an overwhelming statistic? Marianne Williamson suspends her presidential campaign. EU scientists find last month was the hottest January on record, the 8th straight time a month has broken its own heat records, starting in June. It's election day in Pakistan, and the military-backed interim government cut off internet and cell service to suppress votes. This is after Imran Khan was imprisoned under suspicious allegations. And lastly, Bolsonaro has been named in a Brazilian federal investigation into whether his government was plotting a coup to stay in power, and he's got to surrender his passport soon. That's fun. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. I'm here with my friends Bradley and Matt. Say hello.
Yo.
You two.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, you didn't say hello. You said two different things, but I'll let it slide.
We're intransigent.
Yes. Let's start here. We didn't get to this yesterday. Representative Rashida Tlaib spoke on the House floor yesterday, or the day before, I guess, because the bill, the standalone bill that the Republicans were floating, and to just send Israel billions and billions of dollars, failed.
The anti-imperialist Republicans?
Yes. Yeah, the ones that hate war. They needed 2/3 in the House to suspend the rules to push this vote forward, a standalone bill to send Israel billions of dollars in the midst of its genocide. And they did not get the 2/3 that they needed, thankfully. Now, as we speak, the Senate is working on, and Senate Republicans are working on, a supplemental aid package that includes billions to Israel, billions to Ukraine, billions to Taiwan that they're working on. But hopefully we could be saved by some Republicans who are standing against Ukraine money, and some progressives who are beginning to, I think, get a little bit more confident in their opposition to Israel. And it's often framed, and I think they see this as politically helpful, to frame it as Netanyahu being the big bad as opposed to the overall structure of what Israel represents. But from a political perspective, because you hear so many liberal Zionists say, I hate Netanyahu, but, well, if you can make it about Netanyahu, I do think that's more politically salient. And Rashida Tlaib is leading the charge here. This was her, as the one Palestinian American in Congress, speech on the floor in opposition to this bill. And I like this because she says the word, and she says what they're doing. She says genocide. And I think this is the first mention or significant accusation that Israel is committing a genocide in the U.S. House.
Gosh.
Here we go again. Sending $17.6 billion U.S. tax dollars with no conditions attached to Netanyahu's extremist government to drop more bombs on innocent Palestinians. The Israeli government has already killed 27,000 people. 11,500 of them were children. I'm tired of my colleagues coming to me whispering, I don't really like Netanyahu. Well, then why are we sending him billions of dollars with no conditions? He literally is telling us over and over again what his intention is. I'm tired of my colleagues coming and whispering to me, Rashida, I support two-state solution. Great. Then send money that conditions for a two-state solution, because Netanyahu has over and over again told us he never wants to see a Palestinian state. So I'm tired. I oppose Netanyahu's war crimes and want him gone too. But many of my colleagues that continue to tell me that do not want to condition the aid. They give it to a genocidal maniac. My message to those my colleagues is simple. If you don't support Netanyahu, if you're disgusted by the countless videos of lifeless children pulled out of the rubble, If you actually believe in upholding human rights and international law, vote no on a blank check to Netanyahu's genocide.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
Thank you.
Time's expired, but thank you for getting the genocide thing in there because there are legal definitions of this. You know, it's not just about vibes, it's not just about feels. Genocide has a legal, internationally recognized definition under the Genocide Convention. And as we have laid out many times over in this program, I feel no qualms about calling it a genocide all the time because I want to democratize the power of the word. It's not just something you read about passively in history. It's not just something that has happened before. And it's not just the Holocaust. Like, the Holocaust was distinctly the Holocaust in its effort to eliminate the entire Jewish population, one of the worst crimes in the history of humanity. 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust and millions of others, Roma, queer people targeted as well. But like, genocides don't have to constitute the elimination of the entire population of a group. They are marked by Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, and Israel is in violation of A, B, C, and D. I've gone through it before. It's quite clear they have been in violation of it many, many times over. So this is a moment to keep saying that word, to understand that these words do have meaning. They have meaning under international law, and that applies to everybody, including the top recipient of U.S. military aid.
They should have obligations too.
And what's so amazing too about this is, even though Rashida Tlaib, I think, is the only member of Congress who is currently right now openly calling it a genocide, the numbers on this are staggering. In 4 months, 49% of Democrats, according to an Economist YouGov poll, believe that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. That is a plurality. Only 21% reject the genocide description altogether. 30% do not know. And then you see how that support for the genocide description is concentrated. I mean, this is, I really appreciate Jeet here opening his piece the other week with these figures, because it's 40% of black people, according to this, accept the genocide description, 46% of Hispanic people, and 49% of voters 18 to 29 believe Israel is committing genocide. Plurality positions, as Jeet writes, in each cohort. And the 49% figure, as I mentioned, of Democrats. Democratic voters, the biggest block there, in response, feels that it is a genocide. And so the fact that that is where that is what people believe so quickly, like the conversation about Israel has turned to that, without members of Congress making the case publicly to define that term, shows how obvious this is. How obvious this is. And she's right. Like, I think the fact that there were only like 43, 46, if I recall, Democrats who, can you clarify that number for me, who voted in favor of suspending the rules to push the standalone bill through, and the rest of the Democrats sided with humanity, with Rashida Tlaib, and AOC was on the House floor and had a strong speech as well. Rashida Tlaib is right that there are whispers, and there are Democrats that are terrified of AIPAC coming after them, that are talking to her behind the scenes and trying to, say, well, I stand, like, being very, very subtle about it.
How pathetic.
But it's pathetic, as she says.
How pathetic that you are an elected member of the United States of America and you're afraid of this. What should be a rogue state, what should be a pariah state, but that is actually a favored nation to get our bombs and our lies across the world. It's supremely pathetic. And I wonder about these people who say, I don't like Netanyahu. Like, what? What is it really? Like, you object to Netanyahu, but not actually the fundamental, what about the occupation?
Right.
What about the settlements? A two-state solution. Like, do you really think the obstacle is the Palestinians? Like, this is infantile.
Netanyahu rejected basically the very reasonable Hamas ceasefire proposal out of hand. where there would be 3 separate phases of full hostage returns and then an exchange of Palestinian prisoners and a ceasefire. He basically said no categorically to it. And that's just not I know that like whatever Netanyahu's approval is like 15% or something in Israel. Whoever's going to come in his place, they won't have the added pressure of like his entire political career is based on continuing this war, but they will still be genocidal because the support right now among the Israeli population for this crime of genocide just miles away from where they live. I mean, this is like the level of indoctrination that we're talking about here and propaganda.
Look at the polls. Like, Israel, like 90% approve of the bombing, more, and then of the remainder, more think that there should be more than less.
Exactly. This has to come from the outside, from pressure from the United States, removing funding unequivocally, and I mean, conditioning it is not enough. But that's where like our discourse is right now. We are so behind where the Democratic voting base is on this right now. And it's because of AIPAC. It's because of money in politics. It's because of fear. It's because of all of these things. And just like a general anti-Arab racism that is so pernicious and so widely accepted in our culture. It's astounding to me. It really is at this point. But more Democrats. Let's go. Start to say these things publicly, because history is not going to look kindly on this moment.
Clock's ticking.
Yep. JR in Philly says Bernie called for cutting funding on Seth Meyers' show and got an ovation from the crowd. Yep. I mean, I saw that too. And good for Seth Meyers, because I don't think any other late night hosts are like even talking about Gaza. It's all Trump stuff, right? I don't watch that, but I would imagine that's the case.
Sounds like you're so fantastic.
I don't know who you're being.
Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, yeah. Dear God. Like, he's the last one. I mean,
he's still on air.
I guess. God, how...
14 years, 15
we've really
years
fallen far from like the Johnny Carson, Dave Letterman era of Conan.
We used to be a country.
I mean, there's more than 4 channels now.
Yes, I know, but like that like sacred space of fucking it's degraded so much. It's become so corporate. It's
degraded, decadence.
Yep. All right. Well, anyway,
gotta return. Anyway, go on.
Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to give you a word from our sponsors, and then we will get into we will speak with Mark Paul about his book, The Ends of Freedom, Recovering America's Lost Promise of Economic Rights. But first, I had been struggling to find a cereal that wasn't horrible for me, but that didn't taste like cardboard. And then I found Magic Spoon through starting on the show and through Sam having it here all the time. And then I started, I'll take a box home. Oh wait, now it's time for me to order one. And in the spot like a few blocks away from me, they have it in the store. So I am a Magic Spoon convert for sure. It has reinvented your favorite childhood cereals to taste great, but each serving contains 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs per serving. It is keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, and soy-free. It's a way to relive those moments watching your favorite cartoons, but it's just 140 calories a serving. Not all that gunk. They have flavors like cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry muffin, maple waffle, honey nut, birthday cake, that one is pretty good, chocolate chip cookie, cinnamon roll. They offer, Magic Spoon offers treats, which are the perfect on-the-go snack as well. They're just like marshmallow treats you had as a kid, but only 1 gram of sugar and 1 to 2 grams of net carbs, and they're packed with 11 grams of protein per bar. Those treats come in 2 flavors, marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter. I mean, when you need a snack, protein, some energy, it's the perfect treat, and it also satisfies your sweet tooth without all the horrible side effects of actually consuming tons of sugar. Head to magicspoon.com/majority report to grab a custom bundle of cereal to try the magic for yourself. And do not forget to add their delicious treats for on the go. Be sure to use our promo code Majority Report, one word, at checkout to save $5 off your order. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, start the new year off right with a delicious bowl of high-protein cereal at magicspoon.com/majority report. Use the code majority report, one word, to save $5 off. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. And I'll add, if you want to get a good start to your day, protein. Protein's good, and this is a great way to do it. And lastly, as the new year unfolds, it is time for us all to pause, take a collective deep breath, and if you find yourself with lingering thoughts and a sense of anxiety or stress, if you're someone who covers the news every day and it's very depressing, discover how Calm can help you dedicate a few minutes each day to unwind and find relaxation within yourself. The Calm app puts the tools you need to feel better in your back pocket. If you go to Calm, CALM, like calm.com/majority, and you'll get a special offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription and new content added every week. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Calm recognizes that everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives, that mental health needs differ from person to person, and that time for meditation may vary. And since self-practices are so deeply personal, Calm strives to provide content that caters to your preferences and needs. Their meditations range from focuses on anxiety, stress, relaxation, to focus on building habits and taking care of your physical well-being. They have sleep stories to get you to bed with hundreds of titles to choose from, including sleep meditations and calming music that will have you drifting off to dreamland quickly and naturally. They even have expert-led talks on topics such as tips to overcome stress, anxiety, handling grief, improving self-esteem, caring for relationships, and more. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. And I will say this, my close friend is a psychologist, and before I even started on the show, she recommended this app to me. So, I trust her, and you should trust Calm as well. For listeners of the show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/majority. Go to calm.com/majority for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/majority. All right, quick break. We'll be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Dr. Mark Paul, Assistant Professor of Economics at Rutgers University, author of The Ends of Freedom, Recovering America's Lost Promise of Economic Rights. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Great to be here with y'all.
So I mean this as a compliment. Your book does not necessarily read like you are an economist. Thank
you.
Yeah, it centers around this call for an economic bill of rights. But most economists I found treat like economics as this science, as something fairly distinct from society, and your book makes it makes the opposite pitch essentially. And it's about what it means to truly be free and to truly have rights in America. Just I guess talk a little bit about the fact that you're an economics professor, and this is not necessarily the typical book that your field kind of produces.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kick off this conversation. Let me start with how I got into economics. Because I don't know about you, but like when you ask your average 5-year-old what they want to do when they get older, they might want to be a nurse or a teacher or a doctor. I wanted to run an aquarium. That was always my dream. Didn't quite shake out. But, coming out of high school, I actually went to culinary school and I worked in kitchens all through high school. And that's what initially got me interested in economics. It was working in the back of the house in restaurants, largely along the line, on the line with immigrants who had been working their ass off 50, 60 hours a week, every single week for a year in and year out. And maybe they worked up to making $14 an hour instead of $12 an hour, but they certainly weren't living that American dream. Then comes along the 2008 financial crisis, and I just saw it bring not only my family down to their knees, but tens of millions of Americans lost their homes, their jobs, and everything they had worked tirelessly for. And I was just sitting here scratching my head thinking, how could this thing we call the economy ruin so many lives? And that's when I began my study of economics, not because I was passionate about supply and demand, but because I cared about people and I cared about people having quality livelihoods. And so that's really what brought me to studying the questions of the economy. And what set me forth on my book was, realizing that, hey, we live in the richest nation to have ever existed. If we distributed wealth equally, each of us would have more than $500,000 in our bank accounts. If we distributed income equally, each of us would have about $100,000 a year on top of that coming in every single year. Now, we wouldn't be living the Jeff Bezos life, but we'd all be doing pretty damn well. But of course, we know that's not the society we've built. That's not how we've chosen to organize it. So I wanted to better understand, how are we so rich, yet we still have 40 million Americans in poverty and another 100 million Americans a step away from poverty? And how are we so rich, but we can't solve our basic needs, like providing people with healthcare and education and housing? And what would it actually take to fix those societal problems? And by centering human beings rather than how do we increase this thing we call GDP, I think that the book takes a much more realistic and human approach to thinking about the economy than what most readers would typically expect from picking up an econ book.
And I guess this is the societal ails. You can boil it down to unfettered capitalism, right? I mean, I that is a way to simplify it to a degree. But what I love that your book does is you kind of incorporate some political theory into it when you're speaking about the nature of rights in this country. Our Bill of Rights is so focused on negative rights, which is a libertarian conception of rights. It's free. Think of it as freedom from something, right? And I remember studying this in school. And if you're a little bit more focused on providing for the general welfare of people, you're going to be focused on positive rights. Not freedom from something, but freedom to do something or to be able to live your life in a certain way. And you talk about this early on in your book, if you don't mind fleshing out that concept for people.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me because we all learn the history of America, and we learn that the Bill of Rights is core to who we are as a people, and that's true. But it's only part of the story, and what we fail to really develop in our middle school and high school education is realizing that the founders were far more complex thinkers than what we learn them to be. In fact, many of the early founders, people like Thomas Paine, Alexander Hamilton, argue not only for negative rights, but also these positive rights that we as members of society should be entitled to things like education, housing, employment opportunities, and the like, to be fully participating members of society. What's really interesting is that this was also a core demand of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, for example, fought tirelessly, of course, for the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Acts. But after those were passed, he pivoted his attention full time to focusing on economic rights. Why? Because for many of the founders, as for King, as for me, political rights, social rights, reproductive rights, for example, these crucial rights are in isolation insufficient to provide people with meaningful freedom to do and be what they have reason to value. That's the ultimate goal, to help people be able to live free lives where they can actually have real opportunity and choice in the type of life they build and structure. If they actually want to go become a teacher or go become a cook or whatever it might be, host a radio show perhaps, but But we need these positive rights, and these positive rights is the state saying, we promise to give you these basic things to develop yourself as a full person. And the positive right we're most familiar with here in the United States is a K through 12 education. Every state has enshrined in its constitution that people have the right to an education. I grew up K through PhD in public schools, as a matter of fact. And that public school system that I didn't have to pay for is precisely what helped develop me, both as a voting citizen and as a member of our society, but also as a thinker and somebody that's then able to go out and write a book and think about how do we improve the society we live in. But when kids go to school, right, they don't have to go show a receipt that they paid to enter the door, right? They just have a right to enter that public school and to receive that education simply by living here in this, country. And so I think it's up to us to think about what are the other rights necessary. We know that these political rights that we have aren't sufficient, right? What are the other rights necessary? And what I try to argue is that economic rights, such as the right to a job, the right to healthcare, the right to housing, which we can get into more detail later, are essential for us to fully realize our political rights. One of the political theorists who works on this, Isaiah Berlin, who kind of coined this conception of positive and negative freedom, talked about how to simply provide somebody with negative rights is to mock their condition. That if all you have is negative rights, the Bill of Rights is meaningless, essentially, if you're starving or if you're homeless. What good is that piece of paper to you if you can't meet your basic human needs? Right.
And it's the Bill of Rights being basically primarily concerned at that point with tyranny and things like that, ends up in a structure of what is guaranteed to us that is heavily individualist. And in a modern society and under capitalism, it's insufficient to provide people with their basic needs, as you laid out with those statistics, and just like with everybody's everyday reality. You mentioned MLK, and he was kind of playing with this concept before his assassination, as well as his opposition to the Vietnam War. I think that is key to kind of seeing where, why he was so unpopular at the time of his death as well, because these were the kind of things that were threatening to the establishment.
And I think that's so important to pick up on for a moment, because, look, challenging the vote was one thing, but that's not what got him assassinated. What got him assassinated was really standing up against the war and fighting for universal economic rights. Right. He wasn't just fighting for economic rights for Black America. He was building a cross-race, cross-class coalition to essentially challenge capitalism. He talked extensively about how we needed to abolish capitalism and build something new. And when you challenge capital, right, when you challenge the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks of the world, that's when shit hits the fan around here. And I think it's just such an important context for us to struggle with and think about, what we as Americans deserve. And we certainly deserve more than we're getting right now.
Certainly. And then, I think you may have mentioned, or I wrote it down, Thomas Paine is somebody who you borrow from and speak about his influence on this, as well as FDR, who before his death was moving towards a kind of more rebuilding phase of America as the war effort was winding down. And as the country had gotten through the worst of the Great Depression, it was, what do we build next? And he was also talking about the concept of an economic bill of rights, of these positive rights being enshrined in legislation.
That's right. This idea of an economic bill of rights really does come from Roosevelt. And what I try to do in the book is kind of draw this linear history from, say, the founders to the radical Republicans and Lincoln, through Roosevelt and the New Deal, to, King in the Civil Rights Movement, and then more recently, some of the progressive movements, the Squad in the House at this moment, who are pushing for these economic rights. But Roosevelt's really the one who put this idea of an economic bill of rights on the map. It was actually in 1944, his second to last State of the Union address, where he called on Congress to enact an economic bill of rights to deliver full and meaningful freedom to the American people. What Roosevelt was searching for here was kind of the cherry on top of the New Deal, so to say. It was the most transformative part of the New Deal, where, in his words, we would actually enact cradle to grave security for all Americans. rights. Now, let's not forget what World War II was actually about for Roosevelt. It was about his 4 freedoms. And one of those key 4 freedoms was the freedom for want. And how could he actually guarantee that to the American people? It was through this economic Bill of Rights. Unfortunately, when Roosevelt passed, Harry Truman at the time was his vice president, and Truman was far from anything we could call a progressive. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes Roosevelt made in his career, was to allow Truman on the ticket rather than to keep Henry Wallace, who was a staunch defender of economic rights, on the ticket, who I do think the future of the Democratic Party in this country would have been fundamentally different had that change not occurred. But unfortunately, that's what we had. So this idea didn't die with Roosevelt, though. It was really, kind of picked up by the civil rights movement. And that's something that we fail to talk about and fail to teach when we discuss the civil rights movement. In fact, even after King was assassinated, the idea continued on. It was his life partner and intellectual partner, Coretta Scott King, who continued to fight for these economic rights. And in fact, I know you all have talked about the Federal Reserve on the show before. The Federal Reserve's dual mandate actually comes out of the economic Bill of Rights. The fact that the Federal Reserve has to pursue full employment was something won by the civil rights movement, won by Coretta Scott King, who was fighting for the right to a job.
That's funny, because that is not their literal stated intention at all anymore. No. I mean, we've covered statements made by past Fed chairs, by Larry Summers, right, about the level of unemployment that you can maintain in order to keep inflation down, is their theory, right? But full employment would be based on like Fed orthodoxy from the past few decades, or like since then in this neoliberal era, is that there has to be a certain level of unemployment to keep workers in line, and then secondarily, keep inflation down too. I mean, that has been seemingly abandoned by anybody, even on the Democratic side of things. Although I will say that Yellen is critical of that assertion, but doesn't go far enough, right? Like that is not anywhere in the discourse right now.
No, it's absolutely not. But this is a co-optation of this idea, quote unquote, that we call full employment, right? Full employment is in the Fed's mandate, but full employment doesn't mean to me 12 million Americans unemployed. It doesn't mean 4 or 5 or even 6% unemployment, which is how the Federal Reserve has modern day defined full employment. That's all BS. And this is the Federal Reserve saying, how do we get around this idea where we're supposed to provide full employment? Well, we come up with this new artificial concept called the NIRU, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, that we push out and then say, 15 million Americans unemployed. Yes, that's full employment. If you ask me what full employment is I'm going to give you the same response as I think most Americans would if you ask them. It means if somebody wants a job, they can get one. Right? That's full employment. And I don't think that's a radical concept. What's fascinating is we did polling on this, actually. And this isn't a left or right issue. Most Americans agree full employment means you can get a job if you want or need one. Full stop. It's not, we're not tinkering around with what the Federal Reserve calls R-star and kind of coming up with all these artificial ways to claim we're at full employment, despite the fact that we're not. If we look at the labor market today, most economists are saying not that we're at full employment, they're saying we're beyond full employment. I mean, that's just a crazy idea to think about. How could we be beyond full employment? I mean, does that mean that most workers have 7 jobs? Like, no. I mean, it's true that some workers have 2 jobs, but it's because their wages are so low that they can't make ends meet.
Right. And the jobs guarantee, this is, I guess, kind of moving to part 2 of your book, where you lay out your vision for an economic Bill of Rights, and the right to work is one of them. Explain to our audience what you think the planks would be of an economic Bill of Rights and what that means.
Sure. So, there's a number of planks that I lay out in the book, largely drawing on Roosevelt and then kind of updating it here for the 21st century. The most important one, and the one that I start with, is this idea of a right to a job. It's that any American willing and able to work should be able to access a job, but not any job, a job that is paid a meaningful and living wage. And so this would actually set a real floor in our labor market, right? If you think about it, the labor market today, a lot of people think we have a floor in the labor market because we have a minimum wage. But there's no minimum wage that applies to unemployed workers. They don't get to access that minimum wage. So a job guarantee would say that the government is willing and able to give anybody who wants a job one. This would radically change the labor market for so many reasons. Not only would it eradicate unemployment once and for all, it would also help eradicate poverty wages. I mean, in many states across the country, the minimum wage is still well south of $10 an hour. People cannot simply live on that. I don't even think anymore $15 an hour is sufficient, not with the other demands that we put on people like rent, utilities, and healthcare costs and the like. So, this notion of a job guarantee, though, not only helps there, but it also really empowers workers in crucial ways. If you have a boss who is abusing you, verbally, sexually, etc., you actually have a real fallback position. You can actually leave and go get a job where you're not going to be harassed and mistreated. If you're a group of workers thinking about going on a strike and all of a sudden, your firm says that they're going to close down your factory or your office building if you strike and you're going to all be out of a job. Again, this is a type of institution that workers know that they will have a job opportunity waiting for them if something like that happens. So it really changes the scales of power. For listeners who might think, this is a little bit pie in the sky, I just want to throw out two pieces of information. One is the vast majority of Americans actually support this idea. Again, we did polling with Data for Progress and found that most Americans, in fact, over 80% of Americans support the idea of a job guarantee, including most independents and Republicans as well. The second thing is that we've basically done it before. During the Great Depression, the Roosevelt administration started something called the CWA, which was the predecessor of the WPA, which most listeners are probably familiar with, the Works Progress Administration. Within 2 months, they employed 1 in 10 workers. That's not 1 in 10 unemployed workers. They employed 1 in 10 of all American workers, putting them to work doing socially meaningful things, be that planting trees, constructing schools. In some instances, they had workers actually creating underwear for the winter, long underwear for the winter, because people were going to freeze to death if they didn't have proper clothing. So the government put them to work making clothing to then give away for free to low-income citizens. I challenge each and every one of us to walk around your community and think about, if we had actual workers, what could they do to improve our community? And there's going to be a long list of improvements. I know that for sure.
Yeah, and that is it also plays into like the deep puritanical notions that we have in this country about the moral failings of people not working, right? So that undercuts that argument right on its face. You also talk about right to housing, right to an education, which you mentioned earlier, but then extending that, of course, through college, right to healthcare, single payer, right to basic income. So there's a UBI element too. I guess let's touch on that, because often when you hear about these thoughts, these ideas played around with by academics like yourself, I usually see it as either or, a jobs guarantee or a UBI, but you have both.
Yeah. So I think when people posit these things as either or, they have a failure of their imagination to think about how do we fundamentally restructure not the safety net of this country, because I think that's wrong, but the well-being state. That's what I like to call it. How do we actually restructure the well-being state to make sure that each and every one of us is taken care of? I think that's the world that we really want to be working towards. The job guarantee, I think, is crucial because, as I discussed earlier, it really rebalances the power dynamics of the labor market. But it also helps ensure people don't have these negative social stigmas of being unemployed. Welfare queens, this trope is precisely what helped dam, the social safety net here in the United States in the first place. But we also need to recognize that many people engage in crucial work that's not market work. Right? They might be engaged in care work, for example, or they might be engaged in creative work. I, for one, have an 18-month-old. And let me tell you, staying home with my 18-month-old is far harder than me coming into the office and answering some emails and advising some students and teaching a lecture class. Care work is often far harder, but we don't reward that in the market. And so we need these two things to go hand in hand. They actually complement each other, precisely because some people shouldn't be heading into work. Some people might choose to take care of a young one, a sick loved one, an elder family member. And to combine these two ideas together is what gives people the actual freedom. You the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to send my child to daycare and go to work. Or, hey, I would like to stay home with my child who is under 2 years old and help them develop and flourish and grow as a person. And I'm going to collect that basic income to help take care of us during that time. So it provides people with real choices. And I think that's what this is about. We have this, artificial notion that negative rights plus access to the market gives us choice. But really, it's just simply not the case. I mean, most people have essentially no choice over what they do in their daily lives.
So I guess this is a perfect way to kind of wrap up here and talk about that notion of what freedom really means, because libertarians have a monopoly on the frickin' word, it seems like, in the way that they like to manipulate it, or even, libertarian or neoliberal concepts of what freedom really means. And when you don't have economic freedom, you really don't have the freedom to do anything. And so that's kind of where we got to start, right?
Absolutely. I think reclaiming this idea of freedom is key. It's, as you highlighted, it's an idea owned by the right today. But one thing I just want to point out is that, the current system we have fails to deliver negative freedom, right? Even according to their own definition. Let's say we buy their definition, which I don't think we should. But if we buy it, their own society they've built, this neoliberal hellscape that we find ourselves in, doesn't deliver meaningful negative freedom either. Most of us spend most of our waking hours at the workplace. Workplaces are essentially mini dictatorships. We don't have freedom in the workplace, right? We are told what to do, when to do it by our bosses. That's why we have bosses. Elizabeth Anderson's work on this is just excellent. She calls it private government. And so most of us are spending, our time and receiving our wages based on what our mini dictators, our bosses, say we deserve and decide what we do with our time. So even accepting that, I think we're failing. But I don't think we should. I think we need to work on building a richer, more meaningful idea of freedom. I think this is one reason why people are so up in arms over the current presidential election, for example. President Trump is a dire threat to democracy. Democracy is a cornerstone of freedom. I do believe that. But I also don't think, again, that it's sufficient for our vote to matter, for us to even have time to go to the polls, right? How many workers don't have time to go to the polls because that's not a national holiday in America, because their boss, again, withholding their freedom, says, no, you can't take time off of work to vote. We need to challenge this concept and reclaim it to be a more inclusive idea that actually provides us with real opportunities and choices to define the lives that we, our loved ones, and our communities collectively lead.
Well, Mark Paul, we have someone writing in, Bayer N Man 12 says, please make Mark Paul dictator for a day. I don't know if you're if you're working on that at all, but I concur. I appreciate it. Dr. Mark Paul, assistant professor of economics at Rutgers, author of The Ends of Freedom: Recovering America's Lost Promise of Economic Rights. We will put a link to your book wherever people are listening or watching this, and at our website, majority.fm. Thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about the Start-Up Utopia and how it became a nightmare for Honduras, as Guillaume Long writes. Be right back. are back, and we are joined now by Guillaume Long, former Foreign Minister of Ecuador, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, author of his recent piece in Foreign Policy entitled How a Start-Up Utopia Became a Nightmare for Honduras. Guillaume, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
No, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
Likewise. Before we talk about the specifics of your piece and just, how seriously dire these kind of like economic development zones are and what it's creating in Honduras, can we talk about the state of Honduran politics, starting with the coup in 2009, and how we got to this particular point?
Sure. I mean, the 2009 Honduran coup was a pretty standard Latin American military-style coup. I mean, I say this because there have been more subtle coups since the 1960s and 70s, and a lot of coups have become sort of more juridical coups, sort of semi-impeachment processes that sometimes look like coups. This is not the case. This is a classical military coup in which the Honduran president back then, Mel Zelaya, was sort of, whisked away in the middle of the night in his pajamas, actually, via a base with U.S. military presence, in fact, and taken out of the country and then replaced in what was, a violent process, which was followed by violent repression of protesters. It was an old-fashioned, violent military coup. I mean, then you had civilian leaders, so it was kind of whitewashed through this. But it was a coup recognized as such by the international community, certainly by the different regional bodies in Latin America. Even the Obama administration kind of called it a coup and then eventually enabled sort of a whitewashing of the coup, enabled the transition after 2009. So it was a brutal process, and it was followed by, 12 years of very authoritarian government. Several administrations, one in particular, the Juan Orlando Hernandez administration, was particularly brutal, authoritarian, and corrupt. And, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the latest president, is now sitting in a U.S. jail facing narco-trafficking charges. So there was the U.S. woke up to the fact that this was both authoritarian and corrupt quite later on in the day, but eventually there was sort of an awakening and coming to terms with the fact that this was a problematic regime. And so the latest coup president, because there's a series of coup presidents, is now sitting in a U.S. jail. So very, very, very sad times for Honduras, and with a deep political consequences because of the authoritarianism, institutional consequences because of the corruption, and also social and economic consequences. This is the heyday of the rise of violence in Honduras. It's also a moment of great growth of poverty and inequality. And of course, and this is a special interest to the United States and concern even in US domestic politics, this is the time of a great wave of migration from Honduras and, generally speaking, the Northern Triangle, but in particular Honduras to the United States, with a peak in 2021, just before the new government was sworn in. So, yeah, sad times for Honduras to 12 years after the 2009 coup.
Yeah, it is. It is something that we in American politics mostly don't reckon with, the fact that coups or destabilization that we support in Latin America results in migration. I mean, like the influx of Venezuelan migrants amidst our crushing sanctions on that country is a big part of why we see some of these migrants coming over. But putting that aside for a second, that corruption that you talk about, that deep corruption after the coup in 2009, really resulted in what your piece centers around, the development of these basically economic development zones. We have versions of that here in the U.S., opportunity zones and tax breaks that go to corporations to invest in this. And we covered this under the Trump administration, how, it was very glad-handy and also not necessarily providing the community investment that it purported to. That is like peanuts compared to the level of devastation that these zones created in Honduras through these corrupt leaders. talk a bit about these zones? They're called ZEDEs, I believe. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but what are they? How did they come to be? And how do they fit into the current political situation in Honduras?
Yeah, so these ZEDEs, which we usually use the sort of term in Spanish, Zedes, but they're basically, as you said, special economic zones. And you're right, there's a long history of this. Actually, going back, you can go way back. You can go back to how the Brits used to administer their empire with the East Asia Company. They're like not having direct state control, but having essentially corporations or boards of corporations, private entities running territories as if that territory was their own private state, right? So, there's been lots of examples. Some special economic zones have had varying degrees of success. If you look at the history of China, the famous one is Shenzhen there, which the Chinese were able to sort of create this kind of free trade zone on their coast, and through that to get some investment, and then to sort of use that as a launching pin for the rest of the modernization of their economy. So, there are some cases that are sometimes heralded as success stories to justify all the others. I think the success stories are few and far between, and the success stories are always accompanied by a strong state sort of looking at what's going on there, and then sort of either eventually taking control or replicating certain practices, but not this is not the case of Honduras, right? The Honduras case is one of the most extreme cases of privatization of space. So not just a tax-free zone, but an area in which corporations basically have absolute autonomy. So much so that they have their own courts, they have their own security services, they have basically their own sovereignty over a chunk of territory, which the Honduran state then cannot sort of meddle in or exert any type of sovereignty in. I think most scholars who study these free ports, free trade zones that have different names around the world, sort of recognize that the Honduran Zede is the most, fundamentalist expression of this.
Wow.
Now, how did it come about? Well, it came about exactly because of the level of corruption that was, tolerated, and I would say encouraged by some large corporations after the coup. So after the coup, a number of corporations approached the Honduran state, and there are some negotiations in order to create these ZEDEs. The first attempt is barred by the Honduran Constitutional Court, which says, wait a minute, this is taking away, territory from Honduran jurisdiction. This is unconstitutional. We cannot have that. So eventually, one of the coup governments gets rid of the Constitutional Court, which stands in the way, and replaces the Constitutional Court by another Constitutional Court with all sorts of judges that are friendly to this process of privatizing Honduran land and giving away to these corporations, the ZEDEs. So you can see here that these corporations have been accompanying the process all along, for over a period of 10 years, until finally they get these ZEDEs passed, and they get given this piece of land to sort of play with and create their own. The word charter city is often used. A city which they can basically run. And a lot of these investors are sort of Silicon Valley libertarians. I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a simplification, but I think it really embodies the kind of investors that you're seeing, who have this kind of dream of charter cities. Startup cities are often words that are also used, in which they're not going to be hampered by state or regulations or taxes or anything like that, and they're basically going to be able to run these private cities for the benefit of their investors, of course, but with a certain utopia in mind, right? The idea is to really show the world that the state is the problem, and that if you have these shining cities that are run by these corporations, it's going to create wealth. And there are a few other cities like that. I mean, a few Bitcoin cities as well in El Salvador and
right.
So it's part of that family, and it is is what happened in Honduras. I mean, 3 such places, 3 such Sedes were created. The biggest one and the most powerful one by far, created on Honduras's largest Caribbean island, an island called Roatan, which is a very idyllic Caribbean island where there's lots of tourism, basically for scuba diving purposes. And the idea is to give a large chunk of this beautiful, pristine island to these investors so that they then can build this shining modern city to do all sorts of economic activities, including some stuff which usually is heavily regulated, including in the United States. In the field of genetics, in the field of bioscience, where there's quite a lot of regulation. So there's some suspicion there as well that, this is a way of doing things without much bioethics involved and without much.
That's so creepy. I mean, it really is this libertarian, vision that you describe. And one that, unfortunately we are seeing in El Salvador, but this is just carving up Honduras to give to US investors and capitalists, regardless of the displacement that it creates, or regardless of the scarcity of resources that it engenders when you just decide to give away parts of your country to rich guys so they can do their little weird experiments. And there's really, based on your piece, not shockingly, I guess, when you realize who's writing these laws and stuff, but there's very few mechanisms for recourse, for challenging them in any meaningful way. Can you talk a little bit about that impact?
Yeah, I mean, in Honduran law, basically, it means the state of Honduras does not have a say on a aspect of its on a key part of its territory, right? It's basically a complete loss of sovereignty on behalf of the Honduran state. It almost amounts to saying that this chunk of territory isn't Honduras anymore, right? I mean, it's pretty serious. I mean, there's a real sort of colonial dimension or neo-colonial dimension to this, right? And so it's unsurprising that, first several Honduran institutions, I mean, I just mentioned the Constitutional Court said, no, this is not okay. And then they were sort of pushed out. And then you've had a lot of civil society organizations. There was various civil society organizations, in fact, came together, including indigenous movement. I mean, that the region where the largest ZED is being constructed is in the Caribbean, so mostly sort of Afro-Caribbean organizations as well getting involved to protest this. Typically also and arrogantly, the corporation arriving on the land that it's been adjudicated, it's been basically given to create this new state, and then also starting to have a conflictive relationship with the local inhabitants, right? Local inhabitants first being told there's going to be a big sort of touristic resort built on their land, and then little by little they realize that the land's being gated, the land's being privatized, social services are now being privatized. There was a big problem with access to water. So starting very soon, you see the Zedes starting to have real, tangible impacts on local inhabitants, and local inhabitants fighting back, protesting, and this coming to, I mean, basically people saying, no, we don't want to be, we're Hondurans, don't want to be part of this crazy dystopian process.
Yeah, utopian for the capitalists there, but what's also interesting to me too is that the current president, the first female president ever of Honduras, Castro, ran in opposition to these. So it's become quite politically salient within Honduras, and has, as a kind of a center leftist, vowed to take them on. And it seems as though there is an international kind of court system, the ICSID that you write about, I believe, where there's arbitration and potential for some sort of recourse. And even the United States, like Elizabeth Warren, has spoken out in opposition to these kinds of zones and zetas in this instance. What is the status of Honduras's efforts under this new president, fairly new president, to push back against this?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, the current president, who's sworn in 2022, the first female president of Honduras on a broadly sort of left of center platform, campaigned in 2021 against these ZEDs. I mean, the no to the ZEDs, literally, that was the slogan, was featured quite prominently in her campaign, right? So when she arrived in power, she said, okay, now we're going to dismantle these ZEDs. First of all, they were unconstitutional and corrupt and all these things we just discussed. And secondly, this was a key message in my campaign, and therefore people have voted for this, and we're going to dismantle this. And surprisingly, Congress voted unanimously in favor of repealing the ZEDs law. Even opposition parties, some of them had actually been in favor of the ZEDs, I think started coming to terms that this was unacceptable, that the Honduran electorate had voted massively against this, that this was extremely unpopular. And in her, let's say, early months in power, in the honeymoon period, she got this unanimous parliamentary vote against the ZEDs and repealed the law. But the investors have said what you've just presented, and they've said, but we are going to take you to court now to this thing called ICSID, which is an international investment state dispute settlement mechanisms, of which there are many in the world. This is quite techy, but I think it's good for your audience to understand, very broadly speaking, what it means. These are arbitration mechanisms when a state and a corporation have a dispute. So when states and investors have disputes, there are treaties that are signed between states that these disputes are not settled in the courts of the countries where the investment happens. This was one of the big things of the sort of neoliberal heyday of the 80s and 90s, I would say, of the Washington Consensus. We often talk a lot about, the privatization, the rolling back the state, the putting an end to the large state. But one of the things, and free trade agreements and all these things, people, I think, and deregulation, people understand this. But what sometimes people don't understand, this came hand in hand with investment state dispute settlement mechanism, what is often called, it's very jargony, but it's called ISDS, right? Investment state dispute settlement mechanism. And these are basically treaties that were signed particularly between states, developing countries in the global south, and countries like the United States or European, but also the Chinese and so on. And the idea was, you will get US investment, but first you sign this treaty here so that if there is a problem, then we don't go to your courts in Honduras or we don't go to your courts in Guatemala. We'll go to an arbitration court. And these arbitration courts, of course, are in Paris and London and Washington. This one in particular, ICSID, is attached to the World Bank, and it is therefore in Washington, D.C. Now, these arbitration mechanisms are terrible, because first of all, the state cannot win, and the state cannot take the investor to court. It's always the investor that takes the state to court. I mean, if the state wins, if you like, it's because he hasn't lost. But, in 35% of the cases that are taken to arbitration, the state doesn't actually lose. But in 65% of the cases, the investor wins, and the investor often wins very big. So in this case, against Honduras, the investors claiming, Honduras is in breach of its investment treaties because, we signed these treaties, the United States signed these treaties. So there are several of them, but they're appealing to one that is in CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. And by closing down the CEDES and by, repealing the CEDES law, Honduras is in breach of that. Therefore, Honduras has to pay the company in Roatan, the ZEDE, at $10.7 billion in compensation. Now, $10.7 billion in compensation is a third of Honduran GDP. Honduran GDP is around $29 billion. It's also 2/3 of Honduras' state budget, right? So these are huge amounts, which would clearly make Honduras bankrupt. based on these treaties that have been signed. Now, we'll have to see how the arbitration case goes. How it goes. It's quite likely that the judges think, no, this is outrageous.
Well, let me ask this then, because I mean, how can they make that determination based on the fact that I guess if looking at the contract, right? The technically they do maybe owe this corporation money, but it was written under corrupt pretenses. Literally, these presidents who wrote these laws, like one of them sitting in a jail right now. So why does that not play into the contractual dispute in an arbitration?
Yeah, the problem is that these arbitration courts, tribunals, this one you mentioned, ICSID, which is attached to the World Bank, are not really run by judges, right? It's not they're not lawyers, or rather they are lawyers, but they're corporate lawyers.
Right.
So they're kind of private courts, and with a strong culture of benefiting investment, because investment is the deity of these arbitration courts, right? So investors are the good guys, the states are the evil predators who are trying to nationalize investment and all. So there's a strong cultural prejudice there, which is why it's rare that a state wins. They never win economically. Sometimes they do not lose, as I've just explained, but it usually goes it usually favors investors. So this is the great fear. Now that's one of the problems. The other scandalous problem, I think, is that a lot of these court cases or arbitration cases are based on the loss of future profits. So actually, if you go to the Seder itself on the island of Roatan, there's nothing. The company that's running the Seder has built 3-4 buildings there. They've started building, but it's mostly gated area which is yet to be developed. So what they're taking Honduras to court for almost $11 billion is loss of future profits.
Future profits, right?
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So I think this is a particular egregious case of ISDS. ISDS is resisted, by the way, all over the world right now. Europeans are departing the Energy Charter Treaty en masse. Why? Because the Energy Charter Treaty, which has these arbitration mechanisms, is basically preventing European states from doing the energy transition, from moving away from fossil fuel. Why? Because same problem, right?
Loss of future profits.
Yeah. Well, you close down a coal mine for environmental purposes, and then the coal investors take you to court because there's an investment treaty here, right? So a lot of European countries saying, "Oh, this is taking this a bit far," where they're moving away from the Energy Charter Treaty. You had both the Trump and the Biden administration in the United States also saying some of these arbitration courts are too strong. So you're seeing the advanced economies moving away, but of course, as usual, they're applying this kind of do as I say, not what as I do policies and double standards. And so you're still seeing a number of kind of wealthy countries kind of bullying developing countries, saying, if you want investment from my country, from my capitalists in your country, then you have to sign these
right.
arbitration clause here. So going back to what you were saying about this is where the debate is at in Washington. Some people are saying, wait a minute, we're saying we don't want this anymore because it's preventing the energy transition, it's preventing the fight against climate change, but then we're imposing this on countries such as Honduras, which is where the battle's at right now.
Exactly. And just to give people a sense, like this actually is a market shift in thinking in Washington. Thankfully, the TPP failed, but it had similar tribunal framework for corporations that would be able to supersede the sovereignty of other countries if losses were to be incurred by that corporation. I mean, that was one of the more controversial Trans-Pacific Partnership elements as well, that why Obama got a ton of criticism for it, as he should have, right? And now there is at least a small, I think, shift in the thinking, because it's like wait, we have handed way too much power to these capitalists, and the fact that they're superseding national sovereignty, now that it's coming back to bite maybe bigger players in Europe and white people in the ass, then now we have a problem with it, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it started, actually, it was the Global South that did start it. So we should, give them credit. The South Africans were the first, then India, then Indonesia, then Ecuador, then Venezuela. Several countries in the Global South start saying, well, we're leaving there are various mechanisms, but the most common ones are bilateral investment treaties. So treaties between two countries that agree that if there's investment, we won't go to the courts of either country, we'll go to these arbitration courts. So a number of countries doing that. But then you're right, it did start, the EU was a big one, right? Because incredibly, the EU is still today the most regulated space on earth, right? So it's still the place on the world where you have the most amount of labor regulations and environmental regulations and so on and so forth, right? So incredibly, you started having cases of EU states being taken to court in Washington, D.C., in ICSID, this World Bank tribunal, by investors. So there was a famous case with Bulgaria, an EU country, being taken to court in Washington simply for upholding European law, right? The European labor law, European environmental law, but because there was a bilateral investment treaty with the United States, the investors was able to say, I don't care whether there's a law. It's not my problem. My problem is you've changed the conditions of the contract, and that is unacceptable. So that created a backlash in the EU. One of the previous EU presidents of the Commission, Juncker, started saying, "Well, this is not right. This is going against the EU." And we are at a place. We are in a stage now where there are a number of sort of almost right-wing politicians that are saying this is not great. But it's easier for them to. It's often the case that they defend that for their own countries, so for EU countries, but you still see a number of EU presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers visiting African states, and I just wrote another piece on this actually, saying, okay, we're leaving the Energy Charter Treaty because we can't tackle climate change by being members, but you should definitely sign the Energy Charter Treaty because otherwise our investors are not going to be protected and you're not going to get investment. So you do get these huge double standards in ISDS still, with a lot of countries from the Global South sort of signing ISDS treaties because they're so desperate for foreign investment, basically.
Well, this is a fascinating topic and one that, needs more coverage. So I would encourage everybody to read the full piece in Foreign Policy entitled How a Startup Utopia Became a Nightmare for Honduras. We will put a link to it wherever folks are listening or watching this, and at majority.fm. Guillaume, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, folks, with that, we are going to wrap up the free part of this program, head into the fun half, where we will take your calls and read your IMs and all that good stuff. Number is 646-257-3920. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Sorry, I was just taking it back because Guillaume makes me want to try the turtleneck blazer combo.
Oh, yes. That's a hard look to pull off.
For Left Reckoning this week, we actually I need to do a little bit of a membership drive because we did Joe Rogan with R.M. Brown. It did a nice long segment of him talking to Bobby Lee about Bobby Lee's experience as a unwitting propagandist for the state of Israel, getting an all expenses paid trip. And Joe Rogan devolved into talking about how bad Palestinian protesters are. We talked about that with R.M., who's as expert on matters Joe Rogan as anybody, but unfortunately Left Reckoning doesn't have the clout that this channel does, where we can just talk about Joe Rogan and eat like any demonetization that comes with that $250 million talent of Spotify demonetizing because of copyright. So we lost all the revenue from this week. So go patreon.com/Left Reckoning, where you can get access to the post game where we had Ben Burgess on as well. So but the episode's still up, and it was really fun. So I recommend people check out our breakdown of increasingly paranoid Joe Rogan, who is also, had other interesting conversations we might talk about.
We might talk about that later. And I might jump off the top of this building. On ESPN today, we will be giving our final picks of the year for the Super Bowl. I'll talk a little bit about fun NBA trades. I mean, the trade deadline is over in an hour and a half, so we'll touch on that a little bit. YouTube.com/ESPN show for that. We have Brandon and we have Binder. Look at that. There they are. Soon to be there. Whoa. Hey guys. How you doing? Huh?
Hey.
Hey,
Brandon. Oh yeah. Also, there's something else to plug, Brandon. If you want to inform people about that.
Absolutely. On the discourse coming up, I haven't had the chance to finish editing it. Matt Leck and I discussed the ins and outs of House Hunters. We managed to do so without besmirching any specific House Hunters, which I thought was a win in and of itself, because it's very easy to be judgmental when you watch that show. So look forward to that this weekend.
Oh, we also talked about being judgmental while watching that show.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought it was a good conversation. I was a little bit hard on the suburbs. Look, I am a urban elitist as a former North Dakotan that moved to Brooklyn. But yeah, I was worried about how harsh I came off on that front. But
I don't feel like you were harsh on the suburbs at all. You were harsh on pool owners.
That's true. Sure. Yeah, but I don't. Well, I keep that energy here.
Yeah.
Pool owners, as in like
people that are like, I want a pool. It's like, how about just have a little bit more house and go to a public pool? I don't understand.
You don't get it
because you can't swim laps in those types of pools anyway. You just want to soak. I'm not here to soak.
We didn't talk about this particular element of it, but like the people who live near the beach who also insist on having a pool because they don't want to share like the water.
Like you're just antisocial.
It's like I don't know. Like this pool's going to be dirty.
I'm not joining in on this. Like I love to soak. I love to lounge. Also, you can't lounge all day at your house if you can't dip. Like it gets pretty hot. You can swim laps in the pool. It's fun to have a drink in the pool.
Take your fewer square feet then and enjoy that maintenance.
Well, right. If I had to pick, I mean, I would take less square feet to have a pool.
Enjoy the maintenance. I would. Go get those leaves out of it.
Okay, well, none of this is happening, so I get to...
I'm not a pool, so I'll take the extra field space, the grass.
Exactly. No. Yeah, exactly. Even grass space I'd rather have for to run around and play touch football or something, yeah.
Yeah.
I love this. I'm somebody who lays too long in the sun. I have a problem with it. So, and I love the water in pools. So I'm the wrong person to talk to about this.
I think we should talk to Tim Pool about this because I imagine he has a lot of thoughts about.
He is the expert.
Pools.
Yes.
He doesn't have a pool though. There's a lot there, but no pool.
But they're empty pools for skateboarding in.
Yeah, exactly. Like, was it Alphaville or Dogtown? I don't know what the movie is.
Well, his pool, his skate park is actually, it doesn't dip in like a pool because he has it in his basement. He's built the ramps up, like it's still ground level. He doesn't have the incline. Like they have to build up for the incline.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway, we can talk about all of this in the fun half. Binder, what's happening on Doomed and Scam Economy?
Yeah, no. So on Doom this week, it spoke about the migrant invasion that does not exist.
Right.
This ridiculousness, and it really, what really made me lose it was that clip, and I played it on the show and spent a lot of time on it, of Sean Hannity talking to Curtis Sliwa of the Guardian Angels.
Oh God, yeah.
And the cameras turn around as the Guardian Angels are attacking what Curtis Sliwa is claiming is a migrant gone wild.
We have that in our sound sheet today. We can play
okay, so let's save it for that then. Because the unveil at the end is it's probably not a huge swerve. You probably see it coming from a mile away, but it's still interesting nonetheless.
Well, we will touch on that then. Check out Doom, check out Scam Economy, The Discourse, Left Reckoning, ESVN, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Dinner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Dinner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look